words, so you're going to hear a lot more of those tonight. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Willis Rosenfeld, and we're talking tonight about Elgar. We're talking specifically about his, let's get that up and running. There we go. We are talking about the combination of Elgar's part songs with choral pedagogy, a topic that's near and dear to my heart. So first, let's just dive right in. Who is this guy, Elgar? He was a musician from England. In most of his life, with a brief window of time, he lived in Worcester, England, and grew up the son of a piano tuner and of a music shop owner. And he found some success as a composer early on. I'm not going to say early on because it was about in his mid-30s when he started to find some success. He worked as a church musician and as somebody just trying to get by teaching lessons for a while. And then he started to make some compositions that sold. And he did that through the 1890s. He was locally successful. And even with, and while doing that, he continued to develop, continued to grow, and eventually around 1900 went from somebody that was successful in Britain to somebody that was successful all over the world. These pieces that you see listed here, variations on an original theme, also known as the Enigma variations, the Dream of Gerontius, and the Pomp and Circumstances March are very famous pieces that get done all the time. Pomp and Circumstances, some of my seniors in the room were probably going to be happy to hear in a few months. It sounds very familiar to some people. Thank you. That's it. Jen's done for the night. Thank you. She's done her duty. So he has a lot of very famous works, many of which are still in the regular symphonic programming, in the regular programming by instrumental groups. He found a lot of success. He's still very popular in England. We don't hear about him as much over here except for Pomp and Circumstances March. But he's a big deal. And also, we can't deny, really, one of the owners of the best mustaches in the history of time. And you'll get to see a lot more of that mustache as we go along tonight. So, he wrote a number of what was called part songs. And that seems like a very basic title for what it is, because it is a very basic title. And it basically is songs, maybe a song that might have sounded like it was written for a solo voice and piano, but written for multiple parts, written for choirs, written for small groups who are performing those songs. They're short, they're secular, they're mostly a cappella, though we do have some part songs that are accompanied, just like a solo song with piano might have been in that period of time as well. There's a lot of variations for the names of the part songs. Not all of them are called part songs, not all of them use the dash. Some of them are called part songs without the dash, some of them are choral songs, some of them are whatever the publisher and or composer felt like putting on there that kind of sounded maybe like a part song. And all of those variations are primarily because they were trying to market them. They were trying to sell them. This is commercially marketed music in a time period before Spotify, before when they're streaming. This is how they're getting the name out there, is they're calling it something that might be appealing to the choirs that are doing them. The choirs that are doing them are amateur choirs. These are not written for your professional groups. Occasionally professional groups did them, but mostly it's people that are community choirs. Not even school groups, but community groups. And these are mostly coming out of 19th century England and Germany. So here's an example of what a part song might look like up here. You'll notice there's a lot of people singing together. There's a lot of what's called homophonic form. In a lot of ways, it's almost hymn-like, which is not an accident. A lot of the church hymns that we see in our hymnals today come from the same period of time, the late 1800s into the early 1900s. This was not an unusual form of choral writing for this period of time. They had limited vocal challenges. Again, I referenced the amateur groups that were performing them. And they have reasonable harmony. They're not trying to push the boundaries of harmony. They're trying to just make nice, pretty music. This form really continues into today in our educational groups. These two songs, "Oh Love" by Elaine Hagenberg and Tarakita, by Renee Esmail. These are pieces that are done on a regular basis at district choirs, at regular high school choirs, all over the place, and they have a lot of the same form. This, Oh Love, right here, we're singing together, and much of the piece is that way. Tarakita, it looks like they're doing things all over the place. There's some entrances here, but they're also doing a lot of things together. These two voices are together, the soprano and bass voices are together. So a lot of the same kind of unified rhythm, same words, easier stuff to sing than you might see in other music of the time. Let's listen to an example of a part song. Chamber choir here is going to sing Love. This is one of his earlier part songs, though it's published with a set of songs that are even younger than it. It was written for his 50th birthday in honor of his wife. And this is a standard part song by Elgar in this time.
Like the rosy northern glow, flushing on a moonless night, where the world is level snow, so thy light. In my time of outer gloom, thou didst come a tender Lord. Thou, when life was but a tomb, beamest pure, beamest pure, beamest pure. Thus I look to heaven again, yearning with eager eyes, as sometimes after dreary rain, dream the skies, dream the skies. On and brighter glow, let me ever gaze on thee, lest I lose warm hope and so cease to be, cease to be.
So that is a standard example of a part song. You hear them singing a lot of the same rhythms. You hear them moving together in parts. The harmony isn't challenging. There are some moments where we're doing some secondary dominance, we're modulating, but for the most part, this isn't a particularly push to the absolute limit difficult piece of music for them. So, to talk about his part songs a little bit more, he wrote 55 total part songs over the whole course of his publishing career. For comparison, his total output was about 150 pieces of music. So that's about a third, a little bit over a third of his compositional output is these part songs. 32 of them were for mixed voices, SATB, 13 for treble voices, and 10 for bass voices. As we mentioned, they were written for amateur groups with popular appeal. And I emphasize that because that becomes an issue as we move forward past his career into how these pieces were recognized or not in the collection of his works. They sold very well. Many other people in this time period were writing part songs. They might sell 2,000 copies regularly. His part songs are selling 10,000, right? And that's a ballpark figure, but the concept is the same. They're selling very well, but once we get past World War II and the choral ensemble groups that he was writing for in England start to wane, they kind of go away in classical, in Western music. And moreover, they are pretty much ignored in Elgar scholarship. If you look at the listing of biographies, of dissertations, the part songs are always like a side note off the side while he's writing a bigger work. So we're going to talk about why. This quote is one of my favorite quotes I found doing this research, so I'm going to dramatically read it for you because I just enjoy this quote so much because it's so negative that you just have to embrace it as a viewpoint of the 20th century on music. There has rarely been a period of 50 years in the whole history of music when so much deplorable music by so many experienced composers was written as in the last half of the 19th century. There's no need to look beyond the great heaps of discarded choral compositions which represent the total output in this medium of practically every composer, whether major or minor. So clearly, Percy Young really enjoyed the music that came out in the second half of the 19th century, which is to say, no, he did not at all. He's very biased towards music that is not part songs. Music that is not part songs. For reference, Percy also wrote a biography on Elgar. So somebody who despised so much of music in this period of time later writes, or I don't remember if it was before or after this actually, he writes a biography on somebody who wrote so much of this music. That's an interesting connection to me. So let's talk about why. Why did he hate these pieces so much? This is the reference that I said earlier. They sold very well, less popular in the 20th century. They mostly were ignored in Elgar scholarship, right? Why? Part songs were vocal works, they were not pushing the boundaries, and canon took over concert programming and academic focus in the 20th century. Let's explore that a little bit more. So part songs are vocal works. In the second half of the 1800s, in the second half of the 19th century, what takes over in Western music is kind of a push away from a lot of vocal works. It becomes an emphasis on symphonic works, and even the choral works that are happening in this period of time, they're choral symphonies. They're pieces that are written for giant groups of instrumentalists and choirs that are big enough to hold up against those symphonies. So something as small in comparison and scale as a part song isn't going to hold up. You know, all of these pieces we talked about that were still what people recognize him primarily for, especially in this country, they're all instrumental works. Dream of Gerontius is not, it's an oratorio, but it's written for a huge orchestra. It's written for a large choir, so it's not really in the same vein as the part songs. The other aspect of this is choral canon. You see a change take place in around the same time period that Elgar is in his prime, where historical success and the works of the great composers and the masterworks and all this language that we hear about Mozart and Beethoven and the great composers, that takes over. That takes over the perspective of what we should be programming. It values the importance of those pieces. It celebrates past innovation and past development. If it's celebrating anything that's current, it's celebrating it because it just really broke the mold of what was happening and they're doing something different. But it also devalues mass appeal. It devalues works that are viewed as what we would consider pop music today. In the same way that a lot of contemporary musicians devalue pop music compared to classical works or other more complex pieces of music. This continues. So Elgar died in the mid-1930s, right in the midst of the 20th century. His music is carried on in the large works. The smaller works are not carried on. They're considered mass appeal. The 21st century, the dynamic has changed. That masterwork perspective in some places has started to be pushed back. It's driven more by message and voice. But they're still devaluing, they are devaluing the historical canon to a certain degree, but they're still devaluing what they would view as mass appeal. And the damage is already done. His part songs are pushed to the side. If you're talking about Elgar, you're talking about the large works. So he doesn't fit in, the part songs don't fit in with either of these groups of canon. So they're not getting programmed on a regular basis. So, just to sum up, why in the world would I study these part songs that most of the academics are ignoring? Well, they're a huge part of his composition output, the output of a person who wrote some beautiful melodies, some beautiful pieces of music, but there's not been a lot of study on them. Very few studies have examined all of them. When they do get examined, it's maybe one piece. here or one piece there and how it connects to his larger works. But they also connect to something that's near and dear to my heart, and that is education. They are viable and accessible pedagogical material. So that leads to the objectives of the study that I did here. Objective 1 was narrow the gap in scholarship on Elgar's part songs by evaluating their pedagogical characteristics. And in order to do that, I needed some kind of tool to evaluate those pieces with. So my second objective was to create a rubric for pedagogical repertoire evaluation that solely prioritizes the technical aspects of choral pedagogy. So let's talk about that rubric a little bit. I'm gonna speed up my talking a little bit because I don't want my choir to pass out over there. They've been standing there looking good for a long time. But, okay, pedagogical repertoire selection is, in my definition, I don't know that there's an official definition out there, so I'm making one, is selection of music that addresses practical educational needs, that prioritizes how you're going to use this music to teach the students something over whether it's pretty music or not. To me, the aesthetic is going to come. I mean, I'm not suggesting that we should pick things that are going to teach that are just weird sounding or ugly, but it's picking music that prioritizes what you're going to learn about it. In my search for a tool that would help me do that, I couldn't find much that did that, that focused on that. I could find a lot of guidance from the conductor's perspective, not a lot from the educator's perspective, prioritizing technical abilities. And I was reaffirmed that I'm on the right track, though, as I started to think about what happens at the secondary level in choral education. This is a rubric that many of my students recognize from our choral assessments that we have to go to. Pretty much every state has some form of this where the students are going to go off, they're going to perform for a set of judges who are going to give them feedback. It's kind of, the equivalent in this state is the SOLs, but for singing, right? So, and we've got all these categories: vocal production, intonation, accuracy, ensemble, diction, musicianship, and performance. This is the Virginia rubric that I'm looking at here. None of those are, this is a beautiful piece of music, which, of course, it's hard to grade that. You're not going to grade the students on whether or not they are singing a piece their conductor chose that's beautiful. But from the conductor's perspective, these are the things that we're teaching to. So we want to be picking music that's going to help lead our students to those points. So I put together my own rubric that focuses on 4 primary criteria. And we'll talk more about these as we go along: vocal production, oral skills, musical expression, and ensemble singing. I did it with 3 different grading levels: a beginning, an intermediate, and advanced. My goal was to make something that if I sat down to review a piece of music, I could do it quickly. I could look over the music, see the elements that are in there, go, okay, I think this is a beginning level, this is an intermediate level, or this is an advanced level, and move on, so that I can keep doing what I'm doing and work on picking music and work on finding things that are going to be good for the students. So I evaluated all of his part songs, and in that evaluation, 35 of them were graded as a level 2. To go back for a moment, when I was doing these intermediate levels, my goal was that the intermediate level was the average high school, right? The average level that a high schooler is going to perform in difficulty in their music. Advanced is going to be your audition select groups, maybe, and beginning is going to be your lower level groups that don't have as much experience or don't have as much training. That's kind of the goal I had for setting the rubric up. So with that in mind, 35 of them came in as intermediate. I didn't do that on purpose. It's not like I made the rubric to make that happen. But as I was reviewing the pieces, that's how it came out. That meant that 63% of his part songs came in on paper as being appropriate pedagogically for the students. That's a pretty high percentage. Of those, an additional 8 were beginning level, and an additional 12 were advanced level. Love, the first song you heard them sing, came in as a 2, just as a perspective on difficulty. So let's look at an example of one of the beginning songs. This is a beginning level piece. It's called False Love. This is also one of the accompanied part songs. It's from a set that he wrote called From the Bavarian Highlands. So you'll hear elements of the mountains in the storytelling on this. that was a song that I rated a beginning level in my works. We're going to flip now to the opposite end of that spectrum. We're going to hear an advanced level, another song about love, this time Love's Tempest. Complicated, a little more difficult than False Love was before. So, as we move through the rubric, we can talk about how some of these elements that were in the rubric specifically apply within Elgar's part songs. The first thing I want to note is that all of Elgar's part songs are vocally accessible. Vocal production is basically how do you sing? How do you produce the tones that you need to do this? So pieces that are going to assist in educating students for vocal production, they're going to have melodic complexity, right? Because it takes more technique and skill to navigate difficult melodies. They're going to have longer phrase length, so you take nice deep breaths and be able to hold those phrases over as long as possible. They're going to challenge the range and tessitura. Range being what's the lowest note a student can hit, what's the highest note, and everything in between. Versus tessitura, where are they singing within that range? Are they spending a lot of time on high notes? Are they spending a lot of time on low notes? Right? That's our difference there between those two. So all of these things are things we're going to look at when we're talking about vocal production. One of the things that you will see if you look at the scores for Elgar's part songs is that for the most part, he keeps all of the notes within the staff. So even the piece that this is Love. This is Love that we were talking about. All of these notes are here within the lines of the staff for the most part. The altos go a little bit low down here. The basses go up a little bit here. But for the most part, they're staying within the staff. You would think that with a song like Love's Tempest that we just heard, the opposite might be true. It might be all over the place. That's not true. He's still within the staff. The sopranos go up to a high G, but a high G is very much within the soprano's range, especially a high school soprano. They love to sing those high notes, right? So this is, there might be moments in this same song, a moment after where these measures are, the tenors go up and hit a high B flat, which they also love. But even in Elgar's version, there's an alternative note if they don't have that note, right? So he's writing it, keeping in mind, you're not necessarily going to have professionals singing these pieces. So, I would recommend any of these pieces if you're trying to develop vocal production in a choir. The next element that was on my rubric was musical expression. This is, if the other thing was how do you sing, how do you make the sounds, this is how do you make it sound interesting, right? So volume changes, loud sounds, quiet sounds, changes from one to the other, sudden changes, articulation, moments that are short when everything else was long, or vice versa. These are all going to be ways that you're going to change and make it interesting for your audience to hear and make the music have variety. Elgar was a product of the late Romantic era, where doing all these things, or having dramatic changes, was a really big deal. They wanted to hear that. They wanted to hear the drama. We've talked in both groups. We've talked a lot about melodrama. Right? Everything is just over the top, and the ladies are swooning, and it's all dramatic, and it's seen in the music. It's seen in the music. Let's look at another example of something that might have some of these musical expression instructional moments. This piece is called Owls. It's, I wouldn't say this is as serious as some of the other songs. This is one of the only pieces that he wrote that he also wrote the words for. And Elgar had a pretty big sense of humor. So I think if you hear the play that he does in here, you'll see that sense of humor in action.
My soul and falling
What is it? Nothing. What is it? Nothing. Over and over again. Over and over again. I don't remember if this is the one for sure, but I believe this is the one he dedicated to his daughter's pet rabbit. Pietro di Alba. So that's, yeah. So you can see he had a sense of humor. So this is an example of music from that. This is the middle. You know, we are going from pianissimo, pianissimo. All that can be is said. What is it? Nothing. What is that? Nothing. Right? Back and forth with major dramatic dynamic changes. So this is an opportunity to teach them back and forth. Teach them those changes and how to really effectively bring those changes to life. Next category, oral skills. How well do you understand what you hear as a musician, right? And a lot of this, at this level, is around understanding concepts like tonal stability. You know, if somebody goes da 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 da, you know what the next note is? Da, da, right? Exactly. Okay? So these pieces are particularly good for helping that tonal stability. Elgar is not very, very far away from tonal centers. In his most complicated works, he's still pretty tonal, especially when you compare him to a lot of the composers that are writing stuff in this period of time where they're starting to experiment with atonal music and bitonal music where this is in one key and this is another and they're happening at the same time. He wrote one piece that he wrote physically on page like that, but even that wasn't truly bitonal. It was just two different keys that happened to line up. He would use a common tone between them, and you never really could tell that it was bitonal. So he's not pushing the boundaries of his harmonic structures. Let's hear another example of the oral skills. This piece, Death on the Hills, was written actually in the same period of time as Love's Tempest earlier. He had kind of a burst of writing part songs, and it plays with harmony all over the place. Still very tonal, but it takes some journeys through that. So there's a lot of little tuning moments in that. There's moments where they're moving up and down by a half step and right back to one thing before they go down to another. You could hear the challenge that would be in that. It's an opportunity to teach them to really lock into their tuning, to really lock into their tonal center. You can see here an example. This is, he's moving all over the place. He's got additional chromatic indications, but really, if you break this down on, in a harmonic analysis, it's basically the circle of fifths. It's basically just moving around within that same key, just playing with it for a moment. So he's not pushing the envelope too much with this. The last bit in here was ensemble singing. So essentially, you've learned to sing, you've learned how to hear it, you've learned how to express it, but can you do it together as a group? How can you do it together as a group? So part independence. Can you hold your own harmony and your own part while somebody else is singing? Do you have balance between the sections? I put diction into this category. Diction is often put in with vocal production, but from the perspective of choral music, diction is about whether or not you're starting and stopping together. It's about whether you're saying the same vowels, right? And rhythm falls into this too. How do you sing together as a unified voice in this? So a lot of the ensemble singing opportunities in this are relatively accessible because of that hymn-like structure that I mentioned earlier. We're going to hear an example of that now. This is Weary Wind of the West. That's an abbreviated version of that song. It goes on to additional parts. But I wanted you to hear a sample of that for the next part that we're talking about. We are looking at the treble arrangements that he did. In addition to his pieces, many of his pieces for SSA or SS were written after the fact. He took successful pieces he had already and made his own versions and treble arrangements. And he did them in a different way than you might typically see. Today, if this happens, you see this a lot, where one song has versions available for all voice parts. There's a TTB version, there's an SSA version, there's an SATB version. It's available for all the voice parts, but it's basically the same song. It has the same accompaniment, the same melody, maybe with just some different voices or some things that are simplified down. In contrast, Elgar didn't find that to be sufficient. He decided when he was writing for treble voices that he wanted to add an accompaniment. Many of the pieces that treble voices have are written for SATB a cappella originally, and he wanted another voice in there, so he made the piano a voice. And in addition to that, he makes their parts a bit more complicated. And we're going to talk about how that happens in a moment. But first, once they are finished getting up on stage, we're going to hear the advanced trebles version of that same piece of music that you just heard. This is their arrangement of Weary Wind of the West. very similar, but yet it's its own version. And to me, it's its own version in the way that the voices interact, right? So this is one of the sections that we heard in the SATV version. These are the voices moving essentially at the same time. They're not moving particularly independently. There's a few moments where maybe these voices get to move independently of everybody else, but then they come back together, and they're really all together. The same thing happens with the treble voices, but they're having more independence. They're maybe echoing each other more, right? In that same section that we just looked at on the other page, the seconds come in first by themselves, and then the altos come in, and then the sopranos come in, and we're building up our voices. And the piano in this section right here is kind of doubling them, but then it gets its own little section of notes on top, its own musical contribution to it. So he's combining these elements into a different type of setting. He's not just making the same piece for a different set of voices. We're going to have the treble sing a couple more pieces, and for that, I'm going to invite our violin players up onto the stage. Yeah, sure, we're going to do that. So one of the other elements that you find from a pedagogical perspective in Elgar's music is opportunities for high school instrumentalists. This wasn't a focus of the study and work that I did on this, but it's a side benefit. As a current high school teacher, I also have access to current high school violin players. And that's an opportunity for them too. This is a very different style than a lot of the music they're playing. It's an opportunity for essentially chamber work as violin players. So this is a bonus to that. So the next two songs that the treble group is doing also have two violins. This was a very, he liked setting pieces like this. There was a number of pieces that have piano, two violins, and treble choir. Particularly, something about that combination, Elgar just thought to himself, yes, this is what I want. So we're going to hear first an arrangement. This is an arrangement of a song he wrote originally for SATB that has, you hear two titles for this, Spanish Serenade or Stars of the Summer Night, depending on which version voicing you hear. They're used interchangeably. This is the SA version of that. And then after that, we'll go to Fly Singing Bird Fly, which was originally written and is, I believe, only set for SSA, and also features the violins as well. So. of my presentation. While the groups are switching out, I want to talk about the conclusion of all of this. So what I found ultimately is that these songs work very well for pedagogical settings, especially secondary choral settings. They align well with their voices. They are very well suited for this. And I also found that my rubric worked pretty well to identify those pieces. The pieces that looked more complicated on the rubric ended up being more complicated to teach. Even things that I maybe initially thought were going to be easier. Oh, yeah, you're right, I did score this as a higher score. So I also want to take a moment to do some thanks. I want to thank my dissertation committee, Dr. Lisa Billingham, Dr. Tina Beveridge, and Dr. Emily Green, along with the Director of Graduate Studies, Dr. Greg Robinson, for all the support that they've given me through this process. I want to thank all the GMU staff who helped set up this recital and the entire doctoral process. I want to thank Jenny Maddock and Rebecca Takamoto, who came in and ran some sectionals for us during the school day to help us get prepared. We had a special retreat day where I made chamber in particular come in and spend, I don't know, like 10 days or so rehearsing music with me. And obviously, I could not have done this without my collaborative piano and also section leader, Jennifer Quinones. Let's give her one more round of applause. Finally, I want to thank the Loudoun County High School faculty and staff for the time that you've allowed the students to be out and for being so supportive of this process. And last but not least, whoo, I'm tired. I'm gonna get some water for that. Last but not least, I want to thank the Loudoun County High School student performers who have dedicated their time and all their families for supporting them through this process. Thank you so much for being a part of this process with me. To close out our performance, while Fly Singing Bird Fly is a fun song, I felt like we needed to go out with a dance. So this is called The Dance. It's kind of obvious, really. This is another piece from the Bavarian Highlands. You can hear the German-style dancing that he was inspired by when he wrote this piece in this.
Dancing
thank you all so much for coming tonight. Thank you for watching. If you've been watching online, it's been great to present this to you, and thanks for being such a great audience.